Now we're on Daf Chof Hey Amud Beis. The Brisa, the Omer quotes a pasuk in Tehillim: Moshe v'Aaron b'Chonav Shmuel v'Kori Shmo Korim El Hashem v'Yanem. And the words v'Hu Yanem that God hearkens to their prayers reflects back not only Moshe and Aaron but also to Shmuel. In other words, the pasuk is equating Shmuel to Moshe v'Aaron. And Moshe, Aaron, and Shmuel were all leaders, very important leaders in the history of Am Yisrael. But from these psukim, we're going to derive the conclusion that Moshe, Aaron, and Shmuel, and again, Shmuel is mentioned together with Yerubal, Bidon, and Yiftach, they're all great leaders who brought about miracles to Klal Yisrael, to save Klal Yisrael from their very powerful enemies. Shakal HaKosav Shlosha Kali Olam, and the Torah weighed in on behalf of three relatively Kali Olam, lightweight tzaddikim, that's Yerubal, Bidon, and Yiftach, Kishlosha Chamurei Olam, as if they were the greatest leaders in Jewish history, like Moshe, Aaron, and Shmuel. Because the pasuk says, "Vayitzlach Hashem es Yerubal," as we saw in Omen Aleph, "Ves Bidon, Ves Yiftach, Ves Shmuel." So all these, whether it's Gidon, whether it's Yiftach, whether it's who did I leave out? Gidon and Shimshon and Yiftach, they all are mentioned in one breath with Shmuel, and Shmuel, on the other hand, is considered equal to Moshe, Aaron. So what's going on here? I mean, with all due respect to these leaders, but they're not on the same level as a Moshe and Aaron. How can we equate them? What sense does that make? Lomarcha, it's meant to teach us Yerubal b'doro k'Moshe b'doro, Bidon b'doro k'Aaron b'doro, v'Yiftach b'doro k'Shmuel b'doro. L'lamedcha shafilu kal shebekalan. And the Torah is weighing these three leaders as if they were as heavy as Moshe, Aaron, and Shmuel to teach us. And in every generation there'll be a leader, and that leader is like Moshe Rabbeinu in his generation. And therefore, a person should not say about a Dayan in his generation, "Oh, is he chashuv like Moshe and Aaron?" Because in truth, he is shakul b'mosam. Because in each generation there will be a leader that's shakul b'moshe b'yan. Yomer, now a pasuk in Dvarim. Ubasa el hakohanim alavim v'al hashofet asher yeh b'hem imahem. Why does the Torah have to say El hashofet asher yeh b'yom imahem? If he sal daitcha shadam holech etzel shofet etzel dayan shelo hoy b'yomov, was he going to take a time machine, time and again? What is this pasuk coming to teach us? Ein lach leilech el etzel shofet sheb'yomov. A person should be he should be secure and comfortable about going for a din Torah and a psak from the shofet in his day, and he shouldn't say, "Well, I'm not going to listen to the shofet because he's not on the level of the earlier generations." The Omer pasuk Koheles al tomar ma hoya shayom rishonim hayutovim kilo mechachma sha'alta al zeh. Don't ask the question, why is it that the earlier days were better than these days? They had a tremendous shefa, what we call the influence coming from above down to this earth, and their shefa at that time of the earlier generations were greater than ours. And the answer is, every generation will be zocher to whatever is appropriate for that generation. So a person therefore should not say that in the diet in his generation, he's not the Dayan in the earlier generation. I'm not going to accept what he said. but rather the Dayanim and the Doros Achronim are to be treated as if they were on the same level of the Dayanim of Doros Rishon. And now Rabbi Yeshua comes to Yavne, to Rabbi Gamliel, on that day of day 11 of the month of Tishrei, which for Rabbi Yeshua would actually be Yom Kippur, would be the 10th day. Tana Rabbanan, we learned to the Brisa. Keivan Shera'a Oso. When Rabbi Gamliel saw Rabbi Yeshua, Oman Mikiso Nishako Al Rosh of Yomalo, Shalom Alecha Rebbe V'Talmidi. Rebbe Shalimaditoni Torah Barab. V'Talmidi Shani Gozer Alecha Gzeira V'Ato Makayma K'Talmud HaMakayim Gzeiras Rabba V'Ashrei Adar She'af HaGedolim Nishmoim L'Ktanim. Now, what does this mean? Fortunate is the generation where the greater ones listen to the lower ones. So because Rabbi Yeshua is greater than Rabbi Gamliel, and yet he listens and he obliges Rabbi Gamliel because Rabbi Gamliel is the Nasi. And the Brisa says we should derive a Kal V'chom. K'tanim L'gdolim. Much more so should someone who's lower accept the authority of someone who's higher, who's greater than him. And from this presentation of Rabbi Gamliel to Rabbi Yeshua, we see that Rabbi Gamliel was not intending in any way to be pogem in the cover of Rabbi Yeshua. It's just that we have a principle here that operates, that the Gedolim have to listen to the Ketanim, and from that we're going to derive a Kal V'chomer, Ketanim L'Gedolim. So the Gemara asks, Kal V'chomer, what are you telling me? That you have to derive, that Gedolim have to be obliged, you have to obey the Gedolim because of a Kal V'chomer Chiyuvo. A katan has to listen to a gadol, Ella, but rather change it a little bit. Ashrei Adar, that if we have someone as great as Rabbi Yeshua, but nevertheless he's nishma, he kowtowed, so to speak, to Ketanim, to Rabbi Gamliel, is then nosim haktanim kal v'chomer bi'atzmi. Those who see what goes on here with Rabbi Yeshua, they will derive a Kal V'chomer. It's not a real bona fide Kal V'chomer because we don't need a Kal V'chomer. They're obligated to listen to the Psak of the Gedolim with or without this Kal V'chomer. But they will derive this Kal V'chomer and be influenced to emulate Rabbi Yeshua, so that the Ketani will be Mekayim, their obligation to listen to the Gedolim. So now we start the third parak. This is called Ra'u Bezdin. And the Mishnah is going to approach further dinim about Kiddush HaChodesh that we started in the previous parak. Ra'u Bezdin V'Kol Yisrael. On day 30, before the end of the day, the Levana was seen by Bezdin, the judges themselves, and by all of Klal. There's the Levant, the new moon. We don't need a. In other cases, on day 30, they investigated the Eidim, they interrogated them, and the interrogation continued into the night. Lo espiku lomar mikudosh ad shechashech. And on day 30, they did not have enough time to declare Mekudash, and now it's already the night of 31. Therefore, already Zeh. If they didn't get to declare those magic words Mekudash on day 30, then the month becomes Me'uba. And you see from this Mishnah how critical it is in order to achieve Kiddush HaChodesh and establish Rosh Chodesh that there be a formal declaration Mekudosh. And even though all the pieces of the puzzle were there, would fit into place before nightfall, but they weren't Makadish. And if they weren't Makadish on day 30, then it becomes automatically a Chodesh Mole, and Rosh Chodesh is on day 31. And another halacha, Re'u Bezdin, there were 71 elders, and they all saw the moon. But Bilvat, there was no one else around, just the 71 elders of the Bezdin. So how can they testify? Presumably, there's going to be a problem with their testimony because they're the Bezdin. They're not playing the role of Aiden. You know, they need Aiden to testify in front of a Bezdin. Another halacha, Ra'u Shlosha V'Hein Bezdin. What happens if the only Aiden that we can find to testify on the Chodesh are members of the court? They themselves are Dayanim. Is there some sort of a recommendation to solve this problem? Yes. Yamdu Hashnayim V'Yoshivu Michavreim Eitzel Hayoch. From the members of the Bezdin, 2 of them should stand up. Now, I'm not sure why it's got to be the Ketanim. Maybe we'll figure that out as we go along. And Yoshivu Mechavreim Eitzel Hayochid, they should find some colleague of theirs, in fact, they need 2, to sit down with the Yochid, and these other 2 colleagues of them did not see the Levana. So there'll be 2 witnesses testifying in front of a Bezdin of 3. V'ya'idu b'fneihem, v'yomru mekudash mekudash, she'ein ha'yochid neman al yidei atzmo. In other words, one person, one dayan, is not capable. He doesn't have the halachic status of being able to mekadesh the chodesh. We need a minimum of 3 dayanim. Gemara asks, "Lamali l'misnei ra'u bezdin b'chol Yisrael." Why didn't you say that ra'u bezdin? That bezdin saw the levana, and they can be mekadesh the chodesh based on what they saw. Why do you have to add that kol Yisrael saw the levana? It's true. The Gemara says, "Salka da'at chamina." I would have thought, Hoil v'ra'u bezdin v'kol Yisrael ifarsam mitla. Now everybody knows that the Levana was seen on day 30. That's a Pearson, that's publicity. Viloli Abrua, and Bezdin was not Makadish the Chodesh. How could that be? Kol ma shetzricha Torah edus v'chakiras u'drishas kidei la'ames shachein niras haLevana. Achroza shel mekudosh is a siyum. That's only to complete the process, to be kovea that this is Rosh Chodesh. We need the Eidim, and Bezdin will accept the Eidim, and there's no way of being Mekadesh the Chodesh without the Eidim. But on the other hand, here in this case, all the Dayanim plus all of Klal Yisrael saw, they witnessed the Levana. So who cares if they weren't Makadesh, the formal Kiddush? Of Mashmalan, the Mishnah tells us no. The Rosh Bezdin has to declare Makudosh. Otherwise, we cannot be Kover the Chodesh, even though, again, all the pieces of the puzzle fit in. Everybody saw the new moon. Or alternatively, we have 2 Eidim who saw the new moon and they passed all the interrogations. We have on what to establish the Chodesh. Okay, they didn't get a chance to say Makudosh until nightfall. But therefore, that's what we need in our Mishnah to tell us that not only did the Dayanim see the Levana, but even Klal Yisrael saw the Levana. After all, at the end of the day, it's the Dayanim who represent, they are the boy koach, they are the agents of Klal Yisrael to be Mekadosh L'Chodesh. And Klal Yisrael know exactly when is Rosh Chodesh because they all saw the moon. No, but we didn't get a chance to say Makudesh Makudesh. So the Gemara understood that when it says Nechku Edusam, it means just like we had Ra'u Bezdin B'chol Yisrael, so too we have Nechkura Edusam. Now, once we have the first case, and the Mishnah rules that since they didn't get a chance to say Mekudesh before nightfall, they cannot be Mekadosh that Chodesh as a Chassid. They have to be Mekadosh a day later as a Mubar. So we derive the conclusion that what's absolutely critical to be Gover the Chodesh are those magic words Mekudesh. So why do you have to bother telling me about Ra'u Eid? Nechku Eid. Came in the Tani Leru Bezdin Kol Yisrael Nechku Eidim Haidim Lamali. Marian says Hachi Kamar. This is what the Mishnah means to tell us. And now the Gemara is saying that Nechku Eidim is a whole nother story. It's not a hemshech of the beginning of the Mishnah. What is it? Inami nechkero ha'edim lo espiku lomar mekudesh at shechashecha harei zeh me'uba. Meaning, the rabbim did not see the levana. Only 2 witnesses saw the levana. They testified in Bezdin. They were interrogated, and Bezdin certified that they are reliable aid. And they're testifying that they saw the new moon. But there was no Mekudesh until it got dark. It was Chashech. Then automatically it becomes a Chodesh Me'ubar. It's Mole. And Rosh Chodesh will be postponed from day 30 to day 31. See, initially the Gemara thought that when it says Ra'u Bezdin B'chol Yisrael, and then it says Nechkura Eidim, the Nechkura Eidim is exactly in that same case. That although all of Klal Yisrael saw the moon, but they took 2 witnesses, they interrogated them because we need Eidim. That's a formal requirement for Kiddush. But now the Gemara is adding a comma to the Mishnah. You read it Ra'u Bezdin B'chol Yisrael, comma, semicolon, that's one case, and Nechkara Ha'edim is another case. But what's common to both is that if the Dayanim did not say those magic words, Mekudesh, then there's no Kiddush. Gemara asks, V'keva the Tani, Shechashecha, Ad Shechashecha, Harei Me'ubar. If Bezdin was not successful in declaring Mekudesh before it got dark, there's a Kal V'chomer open. If in a case where Bezdin themselves saw the new moon together with all of Klal Yisrael, nevertheless, the 30th day of the month is not going to be sanctified as Rosh Chodesh. How much more so if the Eidim came and they testified that they saw, just 1 second, if you're telling me that even in the case where there was a public demonstration, so to speak, that they saw the Levana on day 29, and yet, since they didn't get a chance to say Mekudesh, it's not sanctified as Rosh Chodesh. Now you have to tell me, in the case of 2 witnesses, I mean, that's not Pirsum. So for sure, if they don't say Mekudesh Mibod Yom, it's not going to become Rosh Chodesh. It's Salka. I would have thought that during the day, they didn't do any action. And the Amir of Mekudesh is what we call Tchilas Din V'Gamro. Tehevi Chakiras Ha'edim Kitchilas Din. I would have thought, no. It's not that the Tchila and the Sofa Din is the word Makudash, the Amir, the declaration of Makudash, but rather the Edus is Tchilas Hadin. And the Sofa Din is when Beis Din is Makabel Edus and they declare them on to be Makudash. Is Tehevi Chakiras Edim Kitchilas Din. Makudash Kigmar Din. If we can split up Kiddush HaChodesh into two parts, one part is going to be Tchilas Din, the other is going to be Sof Din or Gmar Din. Then we have a principle that if the Dayanim begin the judgment during the daylight hours, they could actually hand down a verdict the night after the day. They cannot begin a judgment at night, but if the judgment was already completed during the day, or at least it's well on its way to be completed, they can complete it at night. Is Tehevi Chakiras Ha'edim Kitchilas Hadin, Makudash is Kigmar Din, Ulekadshe V'Laila. We had already the Chakiras Ha'edim by daylight. That's called Tchilas Hadin. And the halacha is that if you start the din by day, you can conclude it by night. This time we learned in the Mishnah Sanhedrin Lamed Beis, Dine Mominus done in Bayom, the Gomer Balayla. Balayla means that even after it's real Lila, you could just hand down a Gmar Din. It's only a verdict. I mean, the actual Shaklavitaria of the Dayanim and the judgment, that took place by day. That's called Tchilas Hadin. So we don't care if the Gmar Hadin is at night. It's Hachanami if we apply that principle that's formulated in Sanhedrin for Edus of Dinei Mamanos, then Hachanami Mekadosh Balayla. Here too in Kiddush HaChodesh, we can be Mekadosh it in the night of 31 Limafreya, such that day 30 should become Rosh Chodesh. And then it's exactly like the case of Chakiras Ha'edim in Dinei Mamanos, where you began the din, it's now daylight, and then you concluded the din and hand down your verdict at night. So therefore, Kamashkel, the Mishnah wants to teach us that in this case where there was Chakiras Ha'edim, that's not considered Tchilas Din. So the Gemara asks, how did the Mishnah know that Chakiras Ha'edim does not qualify as Tchilas Hadin? And the answer is a special limud, especially from Makra. The Torah says regarding Rosh Chodesh and being Kaddish the Chodesh, and this is the 81st chapter of Psalm, very well known. That is a chok that Rosh Hashana is the Me'adin. So that means that we consider the Makudash to be both Tchilas Din and Sof Din. Emas Havichok, when is Rosh Chodesh Chal as a chok? Bigmar Din, B'kakari leRachmana Mishpat. Ma Mishpat Bayom, Afachanami Bayom. Just like the Tchilas Din and Dinei Mamanos is B'yom, but it has to start during the day. Here too, with regard to Kiddush HaKodesh, where the Tchilas Hadin and the Sof Din are all wrapped up in Mekudash, that has to take place by day. But Beis Din, there were no other witnesses except for the Beis Din themselves. Ya'am du shnayim v'ya'idu b'fneihem. V'amai. The Gemara says, well, why do they have to testify? You know something. All the Dayanim on this court know something. Well, why do we need a formal testimony? Lo tehei shmiya gedola miriya. It's impossible to say that hearing something for the Eidim would be greater than seeing the actual thing. You see it in front of you. You saw the Levana. So certainly Re'iyah is greater than Shmiya. Rav Zera could go and show Uba Laila. On the night of the 30th, that's when they saw the Levana. And the Laila is not kosher for Kiddush HaChodesh. So it's really interesting. As far as Mekudesh, that certainly has to take place by day, and that we derive from Chok and Mishpah. As far as another question is concerned, why do the Dayanim themselves need testimony if they saw the Levana? Rabbi Zera says that the case is they saw the Levana at night, and the night is not kosher for Kiddush HaChodesh. But Enoch Hinami, it comes out that had they seen the Levana by day, then the Dayanim could be Makadosh L'Chodesh without a formal Eidos. There's no need for Eidos, Lo Teishmiya Gedola Miriya. So the reason why they had to set up amongst themselves, amongst the Dayanim Eidim, to testify in front of others to Makadosh L'Chodesh, and why don't we say Lo Teishmiya Gedola Miriya? The answer is that we're talking about a case where they saw it at night. Ra'u Shloshim Ein Bezdin Yamdu Shnayim V'Yoshivu Mechavireim Eitzel Hayochim. So if a bezdin of 3 people saw the Levana, then they can set up 2 of them as Eidim and add 2 colleagues to the 3rd member of the court, so the 3 members of the court. The Gemara asks again the same question. And if you want to use Rav Zera's answer, then Hachanami could go through Ubalayla, half. Then the Mishnah is just repeating itself. The Gemara answers, really, it's a case of Ubalayla. You'll ask me, is the Mishnah repeating itself? No, Seifa Itzricha. There's a Chiddush in the Seifa. The Ein HaYochid Neman Al Yidei Atzmo. This is a brand new din, that the Yochid is not considered a Bezdin. Why would we think a Yochid could be considered a Bezdin? Only one Dayan. Salke Daitamina Hoel, the Tanya we learned to the Bryce and Didi Mominus Bishlosha, Bim Hoy Mumcha Larabim, Donafilu be Yochid. That there's such a thing called a Yochid Mumcha, and he has the status of Tzriyadim because he's exceptional genius. He's a scholar of scholars. It's Hochinami, Mekadshe B'Yochid. Here too, in Kiddush HaChodesh, we should be Mekadosh B'Yochid if the Yochid is a Mumcha Larabim. Kamash Fulan, the Tana teaches me, no, that's not the thing. We need to be Mekadosh L'Chodesh on the 3rd. So Gemara says, why not accept this equation between Kiddush HaChodesh and Dini Mominus to its logical conclusion? And just like in Dini Mominus, a Yochid Mumcha can serve as a bezdin of 3, the same thing should apply with regard to Kiddush HaChodesh. The greatest Mumcha L'Rabbim is Moshe Rabbeinu, and nevertheless, God says to Moshe, Ad de'ika Aaron v'adoch, I want Aaron to join with you. The Tzib, Vayomer Hashem al Moshe ve'al Aaron v'eretz Mitzrayim le'mor ha'chodesh hazeh lachem. So since the klal is that we're not Moshe but Bezdin Shakul, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe to add Aaron, but that gives you Sachakol 2 Dayanim. We're going to have to add a 3rd Dayan to break up that even number. But we see clearly that he can be mitzvah for them with 2 Eidim. So we see that in Torah you have to Mekadosh L'Chodesh b'Shloshet Dayanim Dafka. But the Gemara says, L'meimer the Eid Nasa Dayan. There's an aide who saw the Maisa. Now we can switch around and become a Dayan. How can he serve as a Dayan in that same judgment when he's an aide, he's a witness to it? In other words, there are 3 Dayanim who saw the Levant, and they could all serve as Amen. But nevertheless, the Mishnah says, that they could serve as judges, even though they themselves witnessed the Levana Lema Masnisin, the lower Rabbi Akiva. And now we have to assume that this Mishnah is against Rabbi Akiva the Sanya Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin Shara'u Echad Shaharges Hanefesh. The Dayanim themselves saw the Ritzicha on the top of Chavav. Miktsasa Nasu Edim, Miktasu Nasu Dayanim Divrei Rabbi Tarfon. Let him divide into two groups, and some will serve as Dayanim and the other as Edim. You can't do both in one person. They all are Edim because they all saw the Ritzicha. The ain't Eid, Nasa Dayan. You cannot appoint, you can't wear two hats. You can't be a Dayan if you're an Eid. And therefore you shall bezdin acher ledu, send them to a different bezdin, yelchu shnayim mehem via idu olav shah, and there you'll find two Eidim to testify. It comes out that Mishnah is against Rabbi Akiva. According to Rabbi Akiva, if you see the Maisi, you cannot serve as a Dayan. Whereas our Mishnah assumes that bezdin, even if they themselves saw the Levana, they can split it up in a way that two of those Dayanim will serve as Eid. So Bezdin Sharos Levana Yecholim L'Shamish Kedayanim, and even though they saw the Levana, they can still serve as Dayanim Ulakadesh Esach. Where we'll stop here on the top of Chavav. We didn't get to the Mishnah, but we ran out of time, so we'll pick that up in Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow.